We're starting a new series today, too. Lucky you guys. It's going to be a three-sermon series over the course of 2 weeks. Not very good at math, but I don't think that works out. So here's how we're going to do it. This is one Sunday. We will do one sermon. Pretty standard. Next Sunday, we'll do another sermon. That's two. The extra sermon will be this upcoming Friday at what time, Russ? 7 o'clock, not 6. Not 6, 7. 7 o'clock, right here. We're doing a unity service with First Christian Church. Why are we hitting this so hard? Because Good Friday is kind of important, but also because unity is important. Jesus prays for it. You know that? John 17. Pretty explicitly, quite a few lines committed to that they would be one as you and I, Father, are one. Jesus' words, not mine. Unity is a vitally important thing, so we have an opportunity to show unity and love between congregations, especially sister congregations of the same exact association with the same theology, and pastors who are actually friends. I actually really like Bryce. He's a cool guy. We want to take the opportunity to do that, all right? So I'd love for you guys to show up. Hopefully FCC will show up, and you'll be able to meet some new people, make some new friends, and hopefully that'll be an honoring experience for Jesus and for the kingdom. But I guess we have to get there first. So we're going to start our Easter series, right? And this week, it's traditional to have a Palm Sunday service, right? And then we do a little bit of pageantry around it. And the sermon talks about when Jesus entered into Jerusalem, the celebration that occurred, and all the pomp and circumstance around that. And it provides quite a contrast with what would happen just 5 or so days later when Jesus was crucified, going from crowds cheering for him to crowds screaming for his execution. I don't know how many people were in both crowds. Jerusalem was a fairly large city, as it is today. But at any rate, it provides quite a contrast. The issue is, the Gospels do this funny thing where the closer you get to the cross, the more detail you get, the more stories you get in a more compressed period of time. The majority of the book of Mark, or just under a majority of the book of Mark, I think it's about a third of the book, maybe just a little bit more than that, is spent just on the last week of Jesus' life. He died probably at age 33, and the majority, or the largest chunk of Jesus' life that Mark pays the most attention to is just the last week. So if you want to preach everything that happened between the triumphal entry and Easter, you need more than just 1 or 2 or 3 days. So we're going to ignore the triumphal entry, and we're going to go somewhere else instead. We're actually going to go to the night before Jesus was crucified. Thursday night, following Jesus' final meal with his followers, what we call the Last Supper. He goes to this place called Gethsemane. It's an Aramaic word, a foreign word. It means olive press. We went to a place called Olive Press because it was a olive grove. It was a isolated place, and he said a really significant prayer. I think by studying this prayer, not only can we get a little bit of an idea of where Jesus' mind was at as he approached his inevitable death, but also we can draw some lessons out of it for our own prayer life. And if you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, I assume the prayers that you would pray would be some pretty fervent ones. The things that you would say would be significant things. Jesus, in that way, is no different than us. We should pay careful attention to things that precede his crucifixion because they have great significance. Now, this story is told in multiple locations, 3 different Gospels. We get quite a few details from, but we're going to be in Mark today. So if you want to follow along in your own Bible, if you have one electronic or otherwise, we'll be in Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 32. If you don't have your own Bible, verses will also be on the screen as we go. Important moments in our life, they deserve prayer. They deserve our commitment before the Lord. So how did Jesus do that? We want to answer that question today. Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 32, as soon as the pastor gets to the right passage. They went to a place called Gethsemane. Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." Simple enough. This is immediately following the Last Supper. They head out to this place. We know from other accounts in Luke and in Matthew that they actually went to this place fairly often. Presumably, Jesus knew whoever owned the grove. Let's give a little bit of a picture of what Gethsemane would have looked like. Probably on the side of a mountain. Well, you guys would call it a mountain because you're flatlanders. I call it a hill. But that's okay. We can get past our differences, right? And it would have been covered with olive trees. Funny thing about trees is that trees grow fairly slowly and usually don't bear any significant amount of fruit for many years. So whoever owned this place was probably a generational farmer. It was probably planted by their father or their grandfather or their great grandfather because trees take a long time to grow. Moreover, if you owned this amount of land and this amount of crops, you probably would have been wealthy. So likely this was owned by a wealthy follower of Jesus who allowed Jesus to come here because it was a place of solitude so that he could pray or meet with his disciples. At any rate, like I said, the other accounts tell us that Jesus comes here frequently. So as he goes to this place and his disciples start to recognize, oh yeah, this is Gethsemane. This is a place with the olive press. They may start to wonder, well, why exactly are we here? You see, Jesus had told them several times that something significant was going to happen, that he was going to be arrested and that he was going to be executed. And he even told them that he was going to come back from the dead. But they were a little hard-headed, so they didn't quite seem to get the message. Regardless, I think there's a small lesson here for our prayer lives as Jesus approaches perhaps the most significant moment of the entirety of his earthly ministry. Jesus goes somewhere isolated, a place of solitude, a place he was familiar with, somewhere he had probably prayed often before. Sometimes it's helpful in our prayer lives to go to a special place. Second of all, we also see him, well, isolate himself to an extent. Anyways, he tells his disciples, wait here. I'm going ahead to pray. Now we'll see in just a moment. He doesn't tell all of them to wait. He actually brings some a little further with him. But the majority of those following him, he tells to wait. There are sometimes some issues in our life, times of great joy or sometimes times of great anxiety where our prayers are so personal that perhaps we don't want to share them with the crowd. I am very appreciative of how often members of our congregation feel the need to share prayer needs for us to pray over. And as a community, I love that we can do that. But we've all had moments, things that are just too personal, but we wouldn't want to share with the entire congregation. Moments of vulnerability where perhaps only those closest to you deserve a window into what's going on in your life. A second lesson I think we draw from Jesus's prayer experience in Gethsemane is that a certain amount of solitude may be appropriate in times of great anxiety or mourning. In verse 33, the story continues. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to become deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them. Stay here and keep watch. While we observe in verse 32 that Jesus does have a certain amount of solitude, he's not entirely alone. He takes Peter, James, and John with him. Now, for my Bible nerds in the crowd, what's significant about those three? There's a handful of times that they're singled out throughout Jesus' ministry, where they're brought to places where others are not permitted to go, even the other 9 of the 12 apostles. The Mount of Transfiguration is one. Those 3 were present when Jesus' face began to shine, when they saw Moses and Elijah, when God spoke on that mountain. They were also present when a child was brought back from the dead, but the other 9 were not. There was a few experiences, significant experiences, powerful experiences, that only those 3, Peter, James, and John, had had with Jesus. In other words, these were his closest friends and his most trusted co-workers. In this time of great anxiety, Jesus does not entirely isolate himself. While he gets away from the crowd, he still keeps those closest to him, most trusted nearby. And I believe that's another lesson for our prayer lives in times of great anxiety and trouble. that we should keep those that are closest, most loved, and most trusted nearby. Now, Mark doesn't say anything about these people praying, but in other accounts given in Matthew and in Luke, we're told that Jesus instructs them to pray for their own specific roles in what is about to come, to pray so that they will not be led astray. So Jesus gives us an example here that our prayer lives should be buttressed by the prayer lives of those close to us as well. Beyond this, Jesus is honest about his emotions. We're told right here in the text that Jesus was deeply troubled. And then he even turns to his friends and says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Jesus doesn't feel the need to lie about his emotions or act invulnerable. And that's something men, I think we especially struggle with, but it's certainly not something exclusive to us. Many of us, for whatever reason, were raised with this idea that emotions aren't something I can show to others. After all, they might think I'm weak. That's not the way that Jesus behaved. And I firmly believe that Jesus, God in the flesh, we can safely say is the strongest human to ever have lived. Yet, he still cries the death of Lazarus, admits his emotions to his friends at Gethsemane. Jesus was in touch with his emotions, we might say. And that doesn't make him any weaker. That's another lesson for our prayer life as well, that we should be honest with our emotions. If you don't think we can be honest with our emotions in our prayer lives, go read the Psalms. They're rather emotional, and many of them are prayers to the Lord as well. However, Jesus also commits himself to a degree of personal prayer. While we know from the other Gospels, he charges these three close friends of his to pray for the occasion that is coming. He also prays on his own. In verse 34, in the second half of that verse, he says, "Stay here and keep watch." In other words, you stay here, I'm going to go a little further. We see this in the next line. Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. So, in this time of great anxiety and great trouble, Jesus prays not only with others, but also alone. He takes responsibility to be praying over this coming moment. That's an interesting lesson as well. Furthermore, he is honest not only with his friends about what he's feeling, but also with the Father. He told the Father precisely what he wanted. He didn't sugarcoat it. Well, Mark summarizes that for us in verse 35, saying he prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. In verse 36, we get his exact words. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Abba is an Aramaic word. It's a term of endearment, something like when a little kid looks at their father and calls him daddy. He says, "Everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me." The cup is a symbol often used by the prophets to talk about a difficult period of time or even a period of judgment. He says, "God, if it is possible, take this period of suffering, take this time of judgment away from me." He is honest with what he wants. He doesn't try to appear holier. Jesus was the holiest man or woman to ever live. Again, God in the flesh. And he doesn't feel the need to act even holier, to say, "Oh, God, I don't really want you to do this," but no, he just says what he wants. He's honest with the Father. He says, "I want this hour to pass through me. I don't want to go through what I am about to go through." He also expresses supreme faith in the Father. He says, "Everything is possible for you." He doesn't say, "God, if you could. God, if it's possible. God, if you have the power." Rather, he is entirely confident that the Father can accomplish the thing that he is asking. That, I believe, also gives us a lesson for our prayer lives. He believed that the Father was mighty enough to provide. Jesus also showed persistence. And if you're working with the people that he was working with, you'd have to have persistence as well. Let's read a few verses here, 47 through 41-ish, and see the kind of stuff that Jesus had to put up with. "He returned to his disciples and found them Sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? You couldn't keep watch for 1 hour. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. And when he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. 3 separate times in the book of Mark. Mark's the only one that records that many returns. Could have even potentially been more than that. But 3 times in the book of Mark, Jesus goes away to pray, stands up. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he's readjusting. He's on the hard earth. Maybe he's uncomfortable and he readjusts. Maybe he just knows, just doing Jesus things. He's like, those fools just fell asleep. I can feel it. He looks up. Yeah, all right. I don't know. Whatever it is, he notices that his followers, maybe just a few dozen yards or a few dozen feet away, have fallen asleep. And he gets up and he wakes up and he says, this is kind of important, guys. Pray. Now, why were they so tired? 2 reasons, I think. The more obvious of the 2 is, well, it's the middle of the night. The Passover meal, which they just had, would have gone late into the night. At the time that this story occurs, it might have been 10, 11, 12, 1 a.m. It was in the dead of night. And this is a people that, generally speaking, went down with the sun and rose up with the sun. Some of you who are older, grew up maybe on farms, know what that's like. And if you interrupt that sleep schedule, you get just a wee bit tired. These guys would have been worn out. It would have been easy to fall asleep. Some of you guys, you get perfect night's rest. You get 8, 9 hours, and then when we pray in church, you still fall asleep. So maybe you can empathize with that just a little bit. At any rate, at least 3 separate times, Jesus walks away and returns. The last time, Mark doesn't even bother to say he walked away. It just says he returned a 3rd time, and they were sleeping again. The other reason why maybe they were sleepy is they just had a big meal. How do you feel after Thanksgiving? Yeah, they're worn. They had a lot to digest, and so they keep falling asleep. But Jesus says there's something a little bit more important here. Now, if I were Jesus, I'd be a little disappointed. And some of us, when we get disappointed with people, we do this weird thing to God, where we're disappointed with people, and then we take it out on God. We get disappointed with the pastor, so we leave the church. We get disappointed with the people in the pews, and so we stop going to the small group. We get disappointed with Christians, and we say, well, I can't call myself an evangelical anymore, because then people think I'm like, so I'm just going to, I don't like that lady, right? We get disappointed with people, and so we start distancing ourselves from things that have nothing to do with the person and have everything to do with God. It's a weird little thing that we do. We don't just do it to God, by the way. I think we do it to other people as well. We get mad at our mother-in-law and we take it out on our spouse, or vice versa, maybe. We do this weird thing where we project our anger and frustrations on people that just don't deserve it. But Jesus doesn't. I'm sure he's disappointed with Peter. He seems pretty frustrated when the 3rd time he comes back and says, are you serious, man? You got like 2 hours left with me and you can't even stay awake. But he doesn't take it out on the Father. He doesn't blame the Father for Peter's failings. That wouldn't make sense. So in our prayer lives, we shouldn't either. Moreover, we should emulate Jesus' persistence. That time and time again, despite disappointments and distractions, he returns to the same prayer. If this cup would pass from me, Father, I know that you are capable, yet not what I will, but what you will. Perhaps that last comment in his prayer is the most significant. It's definitely the one I try to emulate the most in my own prayer life. Not what I will, but what you will. I don't know about you, but I have trouble thinking of any times in my life where I've been 100% confident in what God wanted me to do. At least not significant times. I mean, yeah, like day to day, there's this things that you've heard from a young age. You shouldn't lie. You should be nice to people, whatever. And in those things, I think the scriptures are fairly clear. But those big decisions in life, should I hold out and see if another job comes up, or should I go to that little church in southern Illinois? Should I go to that school in the middle of Missouri, or should I go to Liberty, or maybe I should just take a gap year and save up some money? That crazy girl from south of St. Louis that I met as a sophomore, should I propose to her, or is she going to be a little bit too much for me? The answer to both is yes. I don't think any of those times in my life, despite how significant they were, I felt 100% certain I knew exactly what God wanted. And in all of those times and many more, this prayer has been exceedingly helpful. God, not what I will, but what you will. Does that make me infallible? No, but at least I asked. There's a lot of lessons we can draw from Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. It can be helpful to seek out a special place. It can be helpful to seek solitude. Regardless, we should ask others to support our prayer lives with their own. We should be honest about our emotions and take responsibility and pray as individuals, not only with other people. We should be honest with the Father as well as with others about how we feel and what we want. Don't beat around the bush, just say it. He knows what you want, anyways. We should have confidence that God is capable of accomplishing the things that we ask, but at the same time, we should acknowledge that maybe that's not His will, and we should come to terms with it. We should make clear to Him that what we want is what He wants, not our own desires. We should be persistent, returning time and time again despite distractions, asking the same request until we receive some sort of answer, be it a yes or a no or a hold up maybe later. The last lesson is an implied one in that very last verse. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Jesus prayed from the moment that he entered the garden and set his disciples where he needed them until Judas and all those who would arrest and execute him came. He prayed until the end, until the moment came. In fact, he actually prayed beyond it because if you go and read the crucifixion narrative, Jesus is praying throughout his ordeal. These are but a handful of lessons that may help your prayer life, especially in moments of big decisions. These can be joyful moments like births and graduations or the opportunity to move to a new area, or they may be anxiety inducing ones like starting a new career. They may simply be difficult without very many redeeming qualities like a major financial loss or the death of a loved one. Regardless, these moments deserve prayer, and not just some throwaway, quick 5-second prayer, but intentional prayer, repeated prayer, prayer that involves every fiber of our being. The kind of prayer that Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. So the next time that you come to one of these notable moments in your life, maybe you should return to Mark chapter 14. Read how Jesus prayed when these moments came, and do likewise. Now, I think it's an appropriate way to end this particular message by praying a slightly reworded version of what Jesus prayed over you all. So, if you allow me to pray for you, then we'll move on with the service. Lord, we know that you are capable of doing all that we would ask of you, and even more. God, for each member of this congregation here, whatever their needs, whatever their desires are, whatever is on their minds and hearts right now, we know that you can accomplish it. And we would ask boldly that you would, whatever those needs, those desires are. But God, even so, even as we ask you directly the things that we would have you do, we also want to submit ourselves to you. We've asked, God, we want to remind ourselves, remind you of your right to say no. And God, should you say no, or should you tell us to wait, we want to rejoice in that. We want what you want, nothing more, nothing less. God, we pray this prayer in the same model that Jesus did, the same model you did as you walked about as a man, teaching and loving, sacrificing for us. God, help us to model that kind of commitment in our prayers from this moment forward. Jesus' name, and for your kingdom, we pray. Amen. Please, guys,